All right, welcome Algebra 2. Let's do this. So before, in the previous video, we finished this level 2 question over here, and we got to that point where we found that -1 was an extraneous solution because you weren't allowed to use -1 over here. Because if I put -1 over here, we get 1 over 0, and 1 divided by 0 is undefined. Okay, so the idea is, let's continue through the packet, right? So we're gonna have a level 2, level 3, level 4, level 5, okay? So the questions get more complicated. So let's see over here. How would we solve this question over here? So the idea is, we want the denominators to be the same, and what is the least common denominator here? It is x plus 6. So notice how we have an x plus 6 here, we have an x plus 6 here, but we wanna, how can we change this x so it has some x plus 6 in the denominator? And the idea is that x is equal to x times x plus 6 over x plus 6, okay? And the idea is, notice that, you see how this is true, that x is equal to x. But then why are we allowed to just do this over here? Because notice, what is something divided by the same thing? You see, x plus 6 divided by x plus 6 is 1. Oh, sorry, I should have wrote that here. You see, x plus 6 divided by x plus 6 is 1. And 1 times anything is the same thing. So you're allowed to substitute this x for this over here, and you're going to have x times x plus 6 over x plus 6, right? And this is this part over here. And then we got to continue. Minus 3x plus 2 parentheses over x plus 6 equals 2x over x plus 6. Okay? Now that the denominators are equal, we're allowed to cancel them out, right? And then we're going to bring everything down. So x times x plus 6 minus, now I put the parentheses here, and you always have to get used to this, that if you do this, you're absolutely wrong. Remember, anytime you bring something down over here when we're solving rational equations, always put it in parentheses, because this negative needs to distribute to the 3x, and it needs to distribute to the positive 2, equals 2x, right? Okay, now from here, I want you to pause the video, and what is the next move? What would you do, right? Okay, so for the next move, let's distribute. Okay, so if we distribute, we have x times x here, x times 6, negative times 3x, and this is over here. So now we have x squared plus 6x minus 3x minus 2 equals 2x. Okay, pause the video, think, what is the next move, right? Don't just wait for me. All right, now here, let's combine like terms. So which terms can we combine? We can combine this 6x and minus 3x. So we have x squared plus 3x minus 2 equals 2x. Okay. Now, what is the next move we want to do? Right? Now from here, pause the video and think about before, like the previous question we did. What do we want to do? How do we continue? Right? The idea is we want 0 on one side. Okay, now this is the most important part of the lesson, or one of them. It's why do you want 0 on one side? Okay, so let's first get 0 on one side, right? So here, how would we do it? You would have minus 2x minus 2x, and now here we have x squared plus x minus 2 equals 0. Now, why did we want 0 on one side? So we can factor, right? So now the opportunity, like once we have 0 on one side, now we could factor. And you have to be good with your factoring skills. What two numbers when you multiply give you -2, but when you add give you +1, right? And pause the video and try and do it, right? So here, it would be x plus 2, x minus 1 equals 0. Okay, now that we have this, what do we say? We say x plus 2 equals 0, x minus 1 equals 0, x equals -2, x equals 1. Okay? And if you just do this and say, okay, mister, I'm done, you have to be very careful. So careful. And why do we have to be careful? Because we have to check for extraneous solutions. Okay? We have to check to see, are you allowed to use x equals -2? Are you allowed to use x equals 1? So when we look over here to the original equation, let's see, what is x not allowed to be, right? And when you look at the denominator, x is not allowed to be -6. So notice that because we didn't get -6 over here, that this solution and this solution is okay. It's not like in the previous problem up here, where remember how we got 2 and -1? The 2 is okay, but the -1 was not okay because x was not allowed to equal -1. Okay, so you always have to check for extraneous solutions at the end. If you just do this and say, okay, I'm done, you might be incorrect because one of these might not be a solution. Okay, let's move on. For the next one, I'm going to speed these up. I'm going to go very, very fast. So the idea is, for this question, what is the least common denominator, right? The least common denominator is x. So what we're going to do is, sharing is caring. We're going to multiply the top and bottom by x and x over here. And we're going to multiply the top and bottom by x and x over here. Okay? So now we have 9x over x, plus 2 over x equals -4x squared over x. Okay? Now, what happens next? Now the denominators here, we can cancel them out. So now we have 9x plus 2 equals -4x squared. Okay? Now, how do we continue further? We want 0 on one side. And how do you know you want 0 on one side? Because we have some sort of quadratic. So now the idea is, how do we get 0 on one side? Let's add 4x squared on both sides. And now here, notice, like this equals 0. And can you combine this 4x squared with the 9x or the 2? No, because they're not like terms. So this is 4x squared plus 9x plus 2. And now here we need to solve this. And if you're saying, oh, mister, okay, what two numbers when I multiply give me 2, but when I add give me 9? You're not allowed to do that because you have this 4 here. What technique do you need? You need the AC method. If you feel very shaky with AC method, you're like, oh, mister, I haven't done that in a long time, then level 3 may be too much for you, or you have to learn your AC method over again. So if you feel shaky with AC method, just raise your hand and I'll show you a video to practice. But if you want to see how it's done, let's do it. So here, I'll just put this up here. Actually, I'll do it right over here. So let's see. If I have this, 4x squared plus 9x plus 2 equals 0. Well, okay, so what's the first move in AC method? A times the C, right? 4 times 2 is 8. And then you ask yourself, what two numbers when you multiply give you 8, but when you add give you 9? And you could pause the video and think about it. But it's 8 and 1. Because 8 times 1 is 8. 8 plus 1 is this 9. And then what do you do with that 8 and that 1? Don't you remember that 9x is equal to 8x plus x? And that's what you're doing. You're substituting this 9x for this. So this is 4x squared plus 8x plus x plus 2 equals 0. And then once you have this, then we do our old school technique of factor by grouping. Okay? And then how do you factor by grouping? Okay, so then this is 4x times x plus 2 plus 1 times x plus 2. So now you have 4x plus 1 times x plus 2 equals 0. So now we just factored this to this. And the idea is, remember that if I do this, plus 1 times x plus 2, you see, like if I FOIL this, if I FOIL this, I'm going to get the original, like 4x times x is 4x squared, 4x times 2 is 8x, 1 times x is x, and then 1 times 2 is 2, and this is 4x squared plus 9x plus 2. Okay, that's kind of like the check, just because we haven't done this in a while. But then now I have 4x plus 1 and I have x plus 2. And the idea here is, okay, now you say 4x plus 1 equals 0, x plus 2 equals 0, x equals minus 2. This one's a little straightforward, and this one you just have to work it a little bit here. This is minus 1, and now you have 4x equals minus 1, and then x equals negative 1 over 4. Okay, and then these are our two solutions. And if you don't just say, okay, I'm done, you got to check. Are you allowed to use x equals negative 1 over 4? Are you allowed to use x equals negative 2? Remember, check extraneous solutions. Okay, so let's see. What can x not be in the original one? X cannot equal 0. So you see, these two solutions are okay. All right, let me do one more question. Oh, this looks like a tough one. All right, so what's the idea here? What is the least common denominator? Okay, so now this is a little tricky. The idea is, before in the other ones, it was pretty straightforward. Like here, it was just x plus 1. Here, it was just x plus 6. Here, it was just x because it was the only one that was there. But here, we have two different denominators. So what is the least common denominator amongst all of them? The idea is, if you have something like this where the denominators are different, you first have to factor, right? You want to factor these so you know what's in all the denominators. So notice that this does not factor, okay? This doesn't have a denominator. But then how does this factor, okay? You have to take your time and remember your factoring techniques, but this is a difference of perfect squares for this one. So this one, the way this factors, it's x plus 1, x minus 1. So now you know that the least common denominator is x plus 1, x minus 1. And now here, notice that now we have to talk about that idea of sharing is caring, right? You have to, you see here, this has x minus 1. What is it missing? It's missing that x plus 1. This doesn't have anything. And so notice that 1 is equal to x plus 1, x minus 1 over x plus 1, x minus 1. Okay? And that's what we're going to do. We're going to substitute this 1 for this. And now what does it become? We have x plus 1 times x over x plus 1, x minus 1 plus x plus 1, x minus 1 over x plus 1, x minus 1 equals negative 1 over x plus 1, x minus 1. Whew! That is a lot of work. But that's why it's level 3, right? It gets more difficult. So now what did we accomplish? The denominators are the same. Okay. Now here, what happens here? This becomes x squared plus x. And here, what is x plus 1 times x minus 1? It's this. So now it's just plus x squared minus 1 equals negative 1. Okay? And then notice that this is x squared plus x, distribute, plus x squared minus 1 equals minus 1. And now here we can combine like terms, so we have 2x squared plus x minus 1 equals minus 1. And once we get to this point, we want to, let's see, we want 0 on one side, so we want 0. So here we'll do plus 1, and notice this just becomes 2x squared plus x equals 0. Okay, because here when you add positive 1 to each of these, it just becomes 0. And now how do you solve for this, right? You gotta take your time. What is your factoring skills? Okay, so what's the greatest common factor? It's x. So this is 2x plus 1 equals 0. So now you have, once you have this, you could say x equals 0. And what's the other one? You have 2x plus 1 equals 0, 2x equals minus 1, x equals negative a half. Okay? So once you have this, how do you check, right? You have to check to see for extraneous solutions. Is x allowed to be 0? Is x allowed to be negative a half? Well, let's take a look at this. Here, when you look at this over here, x cannot be 1. When you look at this over here, notice that it has x plus 1, x minus 1. So here, x cannot be negative 1 or x cannot be 1. So here, this is what x cannot be. X cannot be 1 or negative 1. So over here, you're allowed to use these. There are no extraneous solutions. Okay. I hope this helped. And wow, that took 16 minutes and 30 seconds. That was a long time. And I didn't even get to level 4 and level 5. I gotta do that too. I think I'll just show it in class because I don't have enough time right now. Alright, I hope this video helped. I will see you in class.